All right, class. So we're going to get into the UV mapping portion of this project. And much like when I model, I like to start with the bigger shapes whenever possible. All right. And since this is going to be the most important part in terms of UVs, let's tackle this one, right? And let's get this out of the way. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you place your UV grid file as the color map for your objects. So by default, all of your objects have the same Lambert 1 material. It's just a Maya material. And we're going to come in here, just like we attach textures to our planets. It's the same process. You don't necessarily need to have this in your project folder, since you're going to be using this file across every single modeling project you ever do, because this is like an essential part of UV mapping. All right, so I just keep this somewhere in my file system. And if we turn on our grid here, we're going to see our texture, right? So this looks crazy right now, obviously, because we don't have any clean UVs. This kind of looks okay, right? And that's kind of what we're going for. We want to try to get the grid to look as even as possible whenever possible. It won't always be possible. It really depends on the shapes you're making. It'll depend on what kind of textures your texture artist wants for the project, what kind of UVs they ask for. It really depends on what the subject is and what's ultimately going to be the finished look that will determine what kind of UV maps you lay out. All right. So for something like this, and again, there's a couple of ways you can do it. It's a round object, very round object, and it goes round technically all the way across the surface at the top anyways. I know this is pointy, but this is still all round geometry basically. It's just sharp at the top. See how this area gets flat? That's easy to deal with. But everything in here becomes kind of tricky. There's not a one UV solution for this. Like I said, it depends on what the textures are that are going to be displayed on this object. So I'm going to treat this as this, right? It's just going to be a solid color. It's not going to be anything complicated, but it looks like we need to be able to add this sort of checkered graphic along the entire body. It looks like all the way around down here in like the bottom half. So keeping that in mind, I want to make UVs that will allow me to do that. All right. So let's talk about a couple of ways that you would tackle this. Some people would, well, let's go up here and let's bring in our UV editor. Okay. And this is the mess we got right now, which is obviously not good, which is why everything looks weird and funky. It's okay. So we need to give ourselves a good starting point, right? This is it's kind of like modeling, right? We want to start with not the perfect UVs, but we want to start with something that we feel comfortable working with in order to get the desired results at the end. So that's where we have all of our UV projections that we can choose from. There's automatic, best plane, camera-based, like we've talked about. And I basically only use automatic, sometimes camera-based. I use planar often, and sometimes cylindrical. But again, we all have different workflows, and this isn't like the rule. This is just how I'm comfortable UV mapping. All right. So for something like this, let's say you wanted to try automatic mapping, and you look at this and you're like, oh, this is what it gives me. But so all of these, like we discussed, these are all shells. So any of these groupings here, they're just shells. So if you right click, you'll be able to select your UV shells, your components, your modeling components, and then your UVs. Don't mistake UVs for vertices, okay? You can't adjust your vertices here. See how, if I find it, I have these vertices in here selected, but in my model, they haven't moved at all. However, if I were to try to move them in here, the vertices, they obviously would break my shape, right? Or change my shape. So just keep that in mind. If you're moving vertices, you're going to move them in your viewport. If you're moving your UVs or UV shells, you'll move them in your UV editor. That is to say, you can still select your UV shells and UVs here if you want to. It just depends on how you feel comfortable selecting these UVs. Sometimes I go back and forth depending on which method would be easier for me to select the desired UVs I want to select. Alright, so generally what we want to do is we want to have the least amount of UV shells as possible, because every single UV shell will develop a certain amount of seams along your model. So if I turn this texture off and I select this, you're going to see these thicker white borders. These are all seams, and they're indicative of where these shells disconnect, right? So if I select this edge here, I'm going to double click on that, and let's see, what am I selecting? All of that. So we have a seam here because this area is disconnected. We have a seam somewhere here because this area is disconnected. And all of these pieces are scattered in this UV space, which is completely impractical and becomes very difficult to texture. All right. So automatic mapping for this would be not great, right? Even though it gives us like a pretty good grid, right? It's pretty clean. Don't worry about this sort of like round distortion on the surface. That's just going to happen for round objects. It's hard to escape that, really. We can force certain things, which is what I'm going to try to do, so we can get this nice and straight as a texture. But generally speaking, something that's round, it's going to have some sort of distortion in the UVs. And in general, you're going to have distortion most of the times on your objects. Unless you have a very simple object, there's a good chance you're going to have a little bit of distortion in your UV grid. Our plan is just to try to minimize that as much as possible, and also to minimize the amount of seams we have, because although it's not that important anymore because we have 3D painting software and we can eliminate seams pretty easily, it's still good practice because you never know whether or not wherever you're working at will have every software you need to make your life easier. Sometimes there are studios that still like to use Photoshop to texture, all right? And you still need to have UVs for every single texturing process, no matter what. So make sure they're clean, because you're probably not going to be the texture artist unless you are a texture artist, obviously. But if you're modeling and you're creating your UVs, there's not a guarantee that you're going to be the texture artist. So you have to make UVs that are clean and that are easily read by the texture artist. Okay? Great. So let's talk about how we can tackle this. So this is kind of like a cylindrical shape. So I'm going to see if cylindrical mapping works for this. And again, there isn't, which I'm going to mention a lot, there isn't a step-by-step process to this, right? I come in here and I try out certain projection maps that I like to use, and I see how they work. So let's say we do a cylindrical map, and we get something like this. And I kind of like this. I understand that these are a little bit stretched out right now. See how all of these are a little bit long or tall? They're not perfect squares, but we can try to fix that. So I'm going to see if we can unfold this. So I'm going to right click, and you have all this issue up here. See how all of this is getting pulled over? That's not good. So I'm going to grab my UVs, just right click, go to UVs. I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to unfold it. So I'm going to hold shift, right click, and you're going to have completely new tools for your UV editor, right? So go to unfold, let's open up this option box. I'm just going to reset this to make sure we're all looking at the same thing. And we'll hit apply. And this is going to happen. And this isn't bad. Okay? We have a seam, as you can see, down the back here. So we turn this off. You'll see it a little bit clearer. That's just gonna be there, right? And we can decide where the seam is, but generally speaking, you want it somewhere where it's hidden, or at least it's least seen by the viewer, because there has to be seams. It's impossible not to have seams if you're going to open something up like a pelt, right? There's some issues here, like I don't like that this is a seam here. There's no reason for that to be a seam. So I'm just gonna come in here and select this, and I'm just gonna leave that straight line there. And in here, we can hold shift, right click, and you'll have your sewing options. So once you have those edges selected, remember, move and sew. All right, awesome. So we get that out of the way. And normally this would be more than enough for an object like this. Yeah, there's some distortion, but like I said, it's impossible to have a perfect straight UV grid in every angle, because it's a round shape. There's just no way to completely open up a fully round shape unless you force it, and I'm gonna try to do that next, but we'll see. All right, and down here, so this is what I don't like, right? Because this is where I'm gonna place this texture here, or try to place this texture, and it looks fine up here up front, but then it starts to curve down the back, which means it's going to be a little bit difficult to get that straight. So I'm going to come in here and just going to select these faces and see where that's happening. So if I wanted to place that checkered texture here, I would have to make sure when I do that in Photoshop, let's say, in a 2D software, I would have to make sure it follows this flow. Which, I mean, it's totally doable, and that's how we used to do it forever. But I want to see if I can make that process a little bit easier by having these edges here a little bit straighter. So I'm just gonna redo my cylindrical map, because I kind of like this, right? Everything is straight. We have straight lines, so I feel like it's easier to follow. Okay? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find these UVs. So if I select these UVs here, and remember, you can select UVs in your 3D space as well. Just be careful to make sure you're actually selecting UVs, Okay? Don't select vertices. You're going to move your vertices, not your UVs. Just like in here, if you select vertices and you try to move them, you're not going to be moving your vertices in your 3D space. They remain put. So just make sure. It becomes a little bit confusing. Just know if you're going to work with UVs, make sure you're doing that in your UV editor. That's where you're going to have all of your UV tools as well. If I hold shift, right click, those are all UV tools, right? If you come here and you hold shift, you're going to have your modeling tools. Okay, so just make sure you're keeping track of that as you work. All right, so I'm going to look for these things wherever they are. Okay, it's up here. I'm just going to fix this real quick. Again, select that edge and come into our UV editor, move and sew. All right, let's get rid of those seams. Awesome. Now let's see, where is this point? It's up here, so I'm guessing it's this top area that's getting a little funky. So I'm going to try to just grab the UVs up top here, and that one, and that one, and that one. Okay, and I'm going to unfold those. So we have our unfold options. I'm going to do unfold 3D and see what it does. Okay, and it's a little bit weird, but I don't mind that in this scenario because the rest of the shape is a solid color, right? I'm just more worried about the area that I'm going to add a very specific texture to. Okay, so now that we have that more or less okay, I'm going to come to these UVs. Actually, what I might do is, so you can toggle between your smooth and unsmooth. I'm going to get rid of this door here. Am I? Let's see what happens. So I'm going to grab all of these UVs up until there. So right before the area that I already unfolded, that top area, all of that, and I'm going to unfold this with a different method. I'm going to go to Legacy, and I like that these are straight horizontally, right? They're all straight edges, so I just know that I need these to stretch out long ways. That way they become a little bit more squared, right? So we can come down here under our legacy method, come down here to pinning, and we can use constraints. So I want this to unfold vertically, right? So I want these to adjust themselves in the y-axis, right? So vertical constraint on and apply, and you're going to see that happen. So now we have straight UVs, looks clean, looks nice all the way up, and this area, it's not a big deal, right? You could get a little bit funkier and you can like disconnect the top if you want to, but for something like this I feel like it would be unnecessary. And then you'll be creating a seam up there. Just gonna come in here and select that edge all the way around, and we'll cut, and now we have a new shell, right? So we have this top area, and then you can unfold this on its own if you like. So let's go back to unfold 3D, unfold, and you'll get some funky shape. And you couldn't probably connect this seam again, but you know, you pick your poison, right? Like you decide whether that's worth it or not for this object. To me, I'm going to undo all that because I don't think it's worth having an extra shell and an extra seam at the top there. So I'm going to undo. And the reason I don't think it's worth it is because nothing's happening up there. It's just a solid color. At best, what we're going to do is we're going to create, like, for something like this, we'd probably just create some type of grunge map for our material, so it could look a little bit worn, or just create more of like an interesting surface texture than just solid yellow. But everything else looks pretty good, right? Everything else is looking good. This, like, we can technically get rid of it. Not get rid of it, but we'll you can, if you want to, separate this into different shapes. Although it looks pretty good as it is, so I'm not going to stress that. Alright, so I'm going to grab this, all of these UVs, and I'm going to scale them down. And I'm going to make sure that it's in this positive space, right? This positive space. So everything from here, so this is the middle, absolute 0. So everything going up and to the right is positive. If you start going to the left side, that's a negative. Below that, negative. And over here is negative, obviously, as well. Okay? Great. And now if we look at these spaces here, so I'm going to select those spaces where that texture would go, we have a pretty straight line. So it would be very easy to go into Photoshop, make, or just find a textured, a checkered texture and place it there, right? We don't have to worry about curving that texture in Photoshop. So this is what I mean, right? Like there isn't, for a lot of this, there isn't a very like a procedural step-by-step, do this, this, and this, and you're always going to get it right. That's just not how it works. All right. It's all situational based. It's all also depending on the place you're working at, the artists you're working with, and you try to accommodate them as well. Okay. I'm going to try one more thing. Since we did a vertical constraint, I want to see if I can do a horizontal. And again, this is something I do just to test it, see if it adds or makes the grid look a little bit better. And let's see. That looks pretty good, right? So kind of clean that up there. And we still have, it looks like, a straight edge under here. See that? So that is one of those situations where I would think it's totally worth adding the horizontal constraint as well. Okay? Alright, so I think we've talked enough here. I think it's probably the most difficult thing we're gonna UV map here. So we got it out of the way, right? So we're gonna leave this here for now, and we'll continue with the rest of these parts in the following videos. Alright? Awesome. So yeah, good luck. If you have any questions, please ask, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Hello class. So getting back to UV mapping, we're gonna start working on the fins, and they're gonna be pretty simple. They're basically a box, and everything is kind of like a box or a cube type of shape. It's kind of dealt the same way. There are exceptions, of course, but we don't really have to worry about that for our needs. It's what we have right now is something pretty simple, so we don't have to overthink this. Okay? So to get started, let me just isolate this so we see this. This is what we have. And of course, you can do this a few different ways. Like, there's nothing wrong with coming up here and using automatic mapping and then reconnecting all of these things. And that's kind of what you run into, right? If you use automatic mapping, you're going to get very clean UVs. Let me just put on this material so we can actually see it, or this texture rather. And everything looks nice and neat, but like we mentioned before, we have all of these shells that we have to reconnect, right? Because there's no reason to have all of these shells and all of these seams everywhere, okay? So I think it's fine. Everybody works differently, but eventually we have to get some uniform result as best we can. So how will we do this? Well, I like to do this with my favorite type of projection, a planar projection. And I want to get a projection of this front face perfectly, because that's kind of the main shape of what's happening here. So I know that this is going to be the z-axis that I need this to aim at. So planar mapping, z-axis, and we'll get this. Okay, it's a little bit wonky. It's okay. And the issue with this is now we have all of these faces on the back. Actually, this is okay, but we have these faces here on the side and the sides that are really, really stretched, which is why we see these really long stretched out lines as opposed to seeing some sort of grid, because all of these things are squashed underneath all of this. So if I start moving these UVs, right click, go to UVs, let me turn this off so we can see this better. You'll see that we have a bunch of UVs lying on top of each other, and we don't really want that. There are exceptions, of course, but we don't want to do that right now. So we have to unfold this, okay? And we have to find a seam. So you always want to find a seam in the most hidden area. So somewhere on the inside, right? Because that's going to be the least visible part. Somewhere on the inside here. And if you want to, you can choose the back edge. So I'm going to come back here. And again, I'm just going to isolate this so we can see this. And I can double click on this edge. Select that all the way down. Come into your UV editor, hold shift, right click, cut. Make sure that you always go into your UV editor if you want to access your UV tools. Otherwise, if you're here, you're going to be accessing all of your modeling tools or any type of tool to manipulate whatever component or object you're selecting, okay? So make sure you're in the correct window. And we have to cut some seams at the bottom here. So I'm going to cut this, maybe this, and this. Now I'm going to try to see if this will unfold well if I leave one of these attached. If not, then we'll just disconnect it and reattach it afterwards. So I'm grabbing this, double clicking, and double clicking. So we have these border edges. I'm going to come in here again, hold shift, right click, and cut. And now let's see if we can unfold this and it'll resolve itself. So select all of your UVs, right? And again, don't mistake that for your vertexes. Select your UVs, hold shift, right click, and unfold. Let's open up our unfold menu. I'm going to reset this so we can see the exact same thing. And let's try unfold 3D. And voila, you're done. That's basically it. And this is going to look pretty good. We can always stand this up a little bit so it's a little bit more upright. And that's all we'll really need for something like this. Okay. And of course, now that we're done with this, we don't want to have to go through the same process over and over again for these duplicates. So there's no reason to. We can just delete these stuff and just reduplicate them and rotate them and duplicate and duplicate. Okay. Now what you're going to find is that because we've duplicated these, all of our UVs for this are in the exact same spot. So if I grab this and this and this and this, you're going to see this color for our UVs. This shader becomes a much richer, deeper blue as opposed to this. And that just means that we have a bunch of shells on top of each other, which I know we do. Now, it wouldn't matter in general, depending on the job or depending on what the plan is for the textures. If it's something that's not really important, this isn't a big deal. We can just have these overlapping, and then whatever textures we place on these will be exactly the same for each one of these fins. However, if we're working on something that's a little bit more high-end and we're going to get close-ups of these fins, or whatever this object is, we want to make sure that these shells are separated from each other, because even though they are the same object, it is impossible, realistically, right? If you're trying to make something very convincing and realistic, it is impossible that all of these will have the same exact texture. They are, the same color, right? This just general purpley bluish color. But in terms of texturing, there's a lot more than just adding a color, right? There's adding a certain feel to the material, making something feel like plastic, and then, or metal, or whatever we're doing. And at that point, there's a lot of surface detail that has to be added to these things, like scratches, dust, smudges, dirt, grunge, things like that. And there's no way that all of these fins will have the exact same imperfections on their surface in the exact same spots for all four of them, right? That's just not realistic. That's not how it would happen in the real world. So if you were trying to make this for something more convincing, you would make sure that each one of these are separate. That way each one of these shells for these objects will have, or can have, a very specific texture applied to it. Okay? I hope that made sense. Oh, whoops. Did I forget to... I guess I didn't save this properly. Sorry. Let me just do this real quick. Looks like I forgot to save when I did this. Alright, cylindrical map. Let's find these issues up here. Edges. Let's just grab this. Move and sew. Great. And let's grab this stuff. Unfold. Great. Let's grab this. And this. Okay. So I'm going to scale this down for now. And like we mentioned, or like we talked about, all of our UVs, they have to exist on this section, this top corner, top right corner. Okay, we don't want to have our UVs in the negative, so we don't want it to be to the left side of this or below this. Okay, so I'm just going to scale this in there just to make this fit in here. And there are a couple of ways that people treat these things. We can put these across several tiles, which is fine. That's one way to do it. Depending on what you're working on, you would have to, because you would need very, very high-res texture maps for a model that's being shown on a, let's say, 4K or 8K resolution, 16K I think they're shooting at nowadays. in those situations, because it's such a high resolution, such a large image, we have to make sure that our texture maps are the highest resolution possible. And if we can allocate more space, so the more space these UV maps take up, the higher resolution we can apply to them, the higher resolution textures we can apply to them. The smaller they are, the more low res they become. Like you can see this, because this is so small, even all of this stuff is becoming very fuzzy. When I bring this up and it's taking up a lot of space, these grid lines become very sharp. Okay, that's the general idea of how this works. So again, it all depends, but right now I'm not too worried about it. I might ultimately just fit this into this single UDIM, so this tile. We'll call them tiles. Every one of these sections here, this square here, this square here, this square here, they're all referred to as tiles or UDIMs, UDIM. Again, it all depends on where you're working on and what resolution this needs to be in, and how important this object is, whatever it is you're modeling. If it's not going to be seen, then there's no reason to take up this much real estate, and we can just fit all of this into a single tile. So we have that fitting in there, and I'm going to select all of my fins here. Now you're going to notice something, that these fins are really, really large compared to this body, the main body of the rocket, and that just doesn't make sense, right? Because in a practical sense, this object here, the main body, is a much bigger object in this 3D space than these fins, right? So there's no reason why these fins should take up more real estate than this main body. Okay, and that's what we talk about. We refer to all of this as textile density, which is just referring to how much space your UVs are taking up in this texture map that we will eventually make. Okay, so each one of these tiles represents one texture file image, or a texture map image. All right, so we have to make sure that these things are in proportion to each other, because right now everything that we put onto these fins in terms of a texture will look to be a better resolution than everything we see on this main body, because these are bigger UV maps. Okay, so we have to make sure that these are the correct scale to one another to represent what's happening in here. So how do we do that? It's pretty simple. You can eyeball it, and that's one way to go about it. Grab all these UVs, we'll scale them down, and then you're going to try to kind of match the text scale, or the anything you can find, the grid line scale, stuff like that. But it becomes like a guessing game, right? And that's okay. We can get pretty close and you can figure it out. But thankfully nowadays we have tools that just does it for us. So make sure you have your UV toolkit open. If you don't, it should open by default when you open up your UV editor, but you can always come up here to tools and just click on this. Right now mine's is not hidden, so the only option I have is to hide it. But if it is hidden, go to tools and just go to show UV toolkit, and there you go. So we can go to transform. We're going to scroll down and we're going to have this little option here, textile density. Okay, so let's make sure that these things are the proper scale in relation to one another. So since this is the biggest object, usually that's where you start with because this is going to take up the most space. So you want to make sure that your biggest object can fit in your tile, okay? And we don't want to have any of this stuff happening. Like we don't want to cross these lines because anything in here will get kind of clipped or cut off. So we want to make sure everything fits in tiles, okay? So let's figure out what's the correct textile density. Very simple. I'm going to select this. This will be my, let's say, reference, that everything is going to be scaled in relation to this bigger shape. So we'll grab all of these UVs, just right click, UVs, grab them. Under textile density, click on get. You're going to see this change. We can select these UVs now for these fins and click on set. And I was actually pretty close. And set. Let's actually make it more obvious so we can see what's happening. So that is the incorrect textile density. This is correct. We'll just click on set and you're going to see they'll all adjust themselves. And then you just kind of have to regroup them. So we're not worried too much about this right now. I'm just going to keep them away for now until we UV map everything, and then we'll fit everything in here or in a couple of tiles depending on how we want to handle this. All right, cool. So I'm going to cut the video there. I think this was long enough, and we'll continue UV mapping in the next videos. All right, so good luck. If you have any questions, reach out, and yeah, take care. Hello class. So we're going to continue with our UV mapping here. We don't have much left, and honestly, let's cover the cylinders because all of the cylinders are basically going to be treated exactly the same, almost all the time. Right? These true cylinders that have bottom faces, faces that go around the body, they're usually separated into those shapes or those shells. The faces on the bottom and then the faces that go around the body. So we usually want something like I'm going to bring up just a standard cylinder primitive, and we'll open up our UV editor because by default these give you pretty decent UVs, right? So we grab all this and we unfold it. Let's go to Unfold 3D. This is what all of your cylinder UVs should look like, more or less. If you have a top, you have a bottom, you have a body. Okay, and the body should always be a straight strip, or at least as straight as possible. You know, there are situations where it just can't happen, but we try. All right, so that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna start down here because we have these nice cylinders here. So this looks a little bit crazy right now. That's fine. I'm just gonna isolate this object so we can see what's happening. So we can try to start with like an automatic map, and it kind of gives you what you want, sort of. But this has too many shells, so we have to get in here and start connecting all of these, right? So we would come in here, grab that border. Where is that? So this one right here. We would move and so. We would grab that border, move and so. Why isn't that moving? Did I not select it? Oh, I might have not selected it. So double click, move and so. Double click. Just gonna do this and move and so, right? And you'll have that, which is kind of what we want, sort of. The only thing we really want to make sure we do is we come to the back here and we want to move this seam. So let me turn off the texture. I want to make sure that this seam is consistent. I'm going to select this object and this object. It's consistent with this body, right? Because we don't want a seam to pop over here if this is all perfectly aligned. We want this to all be consistent. So I'm just going to come over here and just grab this and that. I'm going to cut, right? So I have that seam now. And now I can grab this, and we'll move and sew. And that's basically it, right? So now we have a seam consistent with the rest of our shapes here. And we have clean UVs. The only other thing I would do for this is I would make sure that this shell, just going to rotate it, hold J, snap it down so it might snap it the other way. Doesn't really, I guess it doesn't really matter. Sometimes we have to rotate it on up vertically, but right now, if I can, I'm going to keep it horizontally just so I can see this grid look nice and straight along with the rest of the body, right? Cool. So we have this. Remember, we want to make sure that we have the consistent textile density across all of our objects. So go to UVs, select all our UVs, just do a marquee selection. Let's go into our UV toolkits and transform and set. And you're going to see it adjust itself. Okay, then just get things back together where they belong. Make sure everything looks nice and neat. That's basically it. So let's talk about a different way we would do this. Let's say if you didn't want to use automatic mapping. What I would do is I might do something like 2 planar maps. So let's talk about it. I'm going to select this. So I want these faces here to look perfectly straight in a long strip, right, or horizontal strip. So to get that, I'm going to select the object. Let's do a planar map, and let's do it on the z-axis, right? So we want to shoot it like this on the z-axis from the perfect front. And again, remember, you can always look down here to see your axis. It just follows your camera, so now you know that your z-axis is this direction. So let's grab that z-axis, apply, and we'll get this. Okay, so I know that I'm just going to press 1 so everything's unsmooth, so I can select these edges a lot easier. And let me turn this off. I know I need to remove the bottom, right? So I'm going to grab this bottom edge all the way around, just double click on it, and we'll cut. So if I go to shell now, I have this top shell and I have this bottom shell. So this is the body and this is those bottom faces. So now I just need to add a seam down the back, right? So I'm just gonna bring back our object so I can find that seam. Okay, so it's this edge. So I need to come in here, and if you don't want to select all of these, you can just double click on this, right? Just make sure that you, in your editor or in your 3D view if you want, just hold Control and do a marquee deselection over the bottom faces, right? So you can see what happens. I'm going to grab this object, we'll isolate it. If I double click on this, right, you'll be creating that seam all the way to the bottom. So just be careful when you're doing that. Granted, in this case, it's not going to matter too much because I'm going to do another projection for these faces, but it's just something to keep in mind, all right? So we have that selected. Hold Shift, right click, and we're going to cut. We're going to grab the UVs, and again, I just want these to unfold horizontally. So I'm going to go to Shift, right click, unfold, unfold option box, and we'll go to Legacy, and let's see, horizontal, and apply. So let's see what this looks like. Nice. Looks pretty good. I'm going to try sometimes I just do this, I just try the other method, so our unfold 3D, just to see if we get a different result. And see how this is trying to curve? So I don't want that, right? This is why we have this option with Unfold Legacy. Okay, awesome. So now that we have that, I'm going to go to face mode and I'm going to select these faces, which represent these bottom faces, right? And we're going to do another projection. So let's go up to UV, planar. Let's open up an option box and let's do a projection on the y-axis, right? From top down, and apply. And we'll get this, which is pretty much what we want, right? Except for this is red. So remember, if it's red, it's flipped. So just grab those vertices, I'm sorry, those UVs, hold shift, right click, and we'll, where is that? Flip, sorry. Shift right click and flip. Or you can just grab those UVs and you can unfold it again. So unfold and it'll flip it for you. Great. Now we'll grab everything, make sure we go into our textile density, and we'll adjust that, right? Just set, and now we have the correct textile density for these objects. Just get these together, keep them nice and neat. All right. And I'm just going to move it off to the side for now. So we have all of this here. Just going to keep them together. This is at the top. Great. I'll just move it up there. And that's basically how we're going to deal with every single cylinder we have. So this right here, this right here, and all of the bolts we create. And this probably. All right, so I'm going to finish this one up. And I just mentioned that just in case, you don't want to sit through this entire process. I'll finish this up here, and then I'll probably make another video going over this, and probably that. Just for the thoroughness, I guess. I'm going to UV map it anyway, so I might as well film it in case anybody wants to see it. All right, so let's just finish this one up, and I'll cut this off at that point. All right, so again, I'm just going to do a planar map. I'm going to do this on the z-axis. I might move a little bit faster while explaining this. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to get out of my smooth mode so I can see my edges clearly. I'm going to turn off my texture so I can see things a little bit easier. Double click on that border here, or that edge, right? Grab that border edge for the bottom. Come back into your UV editor, hold shift, right click, cut, select your UVs, make sure that they disconnected. So you have this shell down here, you have this shell down here, or up here. And then I'm just going to find the back side so I can figure out where that seam is. It's going to be right here. I'm going to grab that seam, double click, cut. Now we have that seam. We can select these UVs, hold shift, right click, unfold option box. We're going to go to legacy, right? And we want to unfold this with a horizontal constraint so it just stretches out horizontally. Done. Now I'm going to go to faces, select these faces here that represent the bottom here. We're going to go to UVs, we're going to do a planar map, and now we're going to change the axis to Y, right? Because we want to shoot this from top down. There we are. And I'm going to hold shift, go to unfold. Actually, don't do that. I'm going to select the UVs first. So actually, let's show you why, just in case. I'm going to go to shell, select this. And let's see if they fix this or not. So if I select the shell and I try to unfold the shell, actually, that's fine. Never mind, they might have fixed it. All right, so it used to be the case that if I select shell and I try to unfold things, there was a chance that it would unfold every single shell. So just be careful. All right, they might have fixed that bug, but just keep that in mind just in case. All right, so I'm going to grab all these UVs now, and again, adjust the textile density. Just click on set. We already have the value we want, right? That's already recorded. And you can always change it again afterwards, which we might. I don't know. Okay, now I'm going to grab these objects here, all of them, and I'm just going to get them close together just so I know that those objects kind of live pretty close to each other. All right, and that's pretty much it. So again, I'm going to make another video just for thoroughness and go over these other cylinders. And yeah, until then, good luck, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Hello class. So continuing our UVs here, I'm going to work on this and this, which are going to be treated exactly the same, right? So again, it's just a cylinder that we isolate selected, but now we just have a top and a bottom. That's the only difference really. So I'm going to do my planar mapping. You see, what is it on right now? On Y. I guess I can do Y right now, and I can just cut these seams right away, right? Those edges at the bottom and the top, just turn off the texture so you can see. Okay, and we'll cut. Now we have a top and a bottom, right? We can grab that and unfold. Unfold 3D is fine. Great. So now we have this, which again, I'm just going to grab these faces, right? So now I have all of these faces along the body. And I'm going to planar map it, and I'm just going to use a z-axis projection, apply, and now let's figure out where the seam goes. It's right there. So I'm going to grab this, this, and this. We'll cut. We'll select the UVs again. Hold Shift, right click, unfold, unfold options, legacy. Make sure you have horizontal excuse me, horizontal constraint selected, and unfold. Right? And that's really big. Alright, so I'm just gonna grab everything. So I'm grabbing all the UVs, right? UV. And let's just set the textile density. And we're done. Nice and easy. Okay. I'm just going to grab this and move it out of the way for now. And now we can do the same thing for the bottom shape. Or if you'd like, you can duplicate this and flip it over and then adjust the size again at the bottom. That's fine too. Either way. I'm just going to, since these are UV videos that we're making here, I'm just going to leave that there and just UV map it again. So I'm going to do a planar map. That looks like that's the z-axis, right? I'm going to come in here, double click on that border edge, double click on this border edge at the bottom. We'll separate those tops and bottoms, or that top and bottom. We have this here, so we can unfold this horizontally now. Let's just make sure we find the seam, right? So it's back here. I can grab that, that, and that edge, cut. Let's grab those UVs, and we'll unfold, legacy, horizontal constraint, apply. Great. I'm just going to move this out of the way real quick. And now I'm going to go into faces mode, grab these faces here, right? Because these both represent the top and the bottom of this shape. And we'll do another planar map, y-axis, apply. We have this. We can go to unfold, unfold 3D, and unfold. Okay. Now we can grab all of these UVs and make sure we adjust our textile density. So just set. And let's just bring these together. Keep them nice and neat. I just do this. All right. And you can get them pretty close together, right? Just make sure that there's some space in between. So to avoid any overlapping. Move that out of the way. And let's work on the bolt. So actually that's pretty much already done, right? Based on because I guess we didn't do much to the primitive. We didn't really adjust the shape too much. So I can probably just grab all of this because we already have the top here separated from the body. And we can just unfold. Let's see what Unfold 3D does. That looks pretty good, I think. Let's make sure you look at your texture. It's going to isolate this and make sure everything looks good, right? Looks like that's working. If this is a little bit crooked and you want to straighten it, select the UVs and you can go into your rotate tool and just eyeball it. But if you want to be a little bit more accurate, you can come down to arrange and layout, and while your shell is close to the position you want it to be, you can click on Orient Shells and it'll just snap it down so it's straight. Alright, so let's grab all of this and let's just set our textile density. This is going to be tiny. Why are there so many shells? Something is not right. Oh no, it's fine, sorry. Thought there was another shell there. It's just a manipulator. Alright, so this is super tiny. So even though this is technically the right textile density, this is one of those moments where I might just grab everything, we break the rule, and we just scale it up a little bit. Otherwise, it just feels a little bit ridiculous. Like, why even do it at that point? Just going to scale it up a little bit. And just going to move these off to the side for now. I don't think I'm going to separate all of these. They're tiny objects, so I can't imagine anybody would ask you to keep all of these UV separate. So when I duplicate this, I'm just going to let them overlap. Okay? And I'm not going to worry too much about it. So again, we want to make sure that we're able to rotate this duplicate along this band, right? So you have to make sure that your object's pivot is here, right? At the center. So remember, you can press D, you go into your pivot manipulation mode, hold X, and just snap it to the center of that grid. Alright, so now go back to your move tool, and we'll duplicate this once. I'm just going to go into my perspective. I'm going to turn the texture off so we can see this. Okay, I'm going to duplicate once. I'm going to hold J. I'm going to snap this maybe twice. So 1, 2. And then from there, don't do anything else. Immediately press Shift and D. Alright, and you'll be able to duplicate it all the way around. Awesome. And now I'm going to grab this. I don't like that my pivot is oriented to the object right now, so I'm just going to go to my tool settings and just change this from object to world so I can just duplicate this again, and I'm going to pull this straight down. Okay, and so I have to adjust the position for this, right? So I'm just going to go up to modify and center pivot so it's easier to adjust this here from the center. And it looks like I have to scale this down a bit. And we'll rotate this, bring it down, bring it over, something like that maybe is fine. Just make sure you check your object to make sure it doesn't have any weird geometry poking around. You can even scale it down a little bit so it's not super long. Okay, just try to find a good place for it. Again, we're just moving it, we're keeping it in the center, right? We're not moving it anywhere else in any other direction. other than the center up and down and then forward and back. We're not going to move it in the x-axis, right? We want this to be perfectly centered. So I don't like that this is popping up so much. So again, I'm just going to scale it in a bit, see if I can get rid of it. Something like that. You pull it forward a little bit and pull it forward a little bit more. Maybe something like that, okay? Kind of like that, that's fine. So before you start duplicating this, we do have some UVs here, right? But since we adjusted the shape a little bit in size, we want to make sure that we unfold this again. So I'm going to grab these. I'm going to move them away from the position they were in. So we're separating them, or this, from these UVs. And now I'll just unfold this. So unfold, unfold 3D, and it might adjust a little bit. Okay. After that, you're free to start duplicating this. So again, I have to move my pivot back to the center of the grid. So D, hold X, and I'm gonna move this pivot in that direction. And then make sure you get out of your pivot manipulation mode. Just go into one of your move tools or transform tools, or you can press D again and you'll get out of it again. All right, just in case anybody forgot. Now I can duplicate this. So duplicate. I'm going to hold J, rotate this 1, 2, and then press Shift D. So it'll duplicate with transform information. Okay. And that looks pretty good. So let's see what our grid looks like here. Looks pretty good. So we have just a couple of shapes left, right? We have this, which is pretty much done, I think. It's not going to be difficult either way. And this. All right, so I'll make another video going over these last bits, and yeah, we'll finish this UV section off. All right, so I'll cut the video there. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Hello, class. So let's wrap up these UVs here. We only have a few objects left, this, and this door. So let's start with this. It's pretty simple. Let's bring up our UV editor, see what's happening right now. We have this, and that doesn't really make sense. So I already know we're going to see this only in this view, right? We don't really see anything else. We just have to make sure that this looks good in this z-axis. So let's just do a planar map in the z-axis. We'll get this. Let's just unfold it. Grab all your UVs, right? Hold shift, right click, unfold, unfold options. Let's just do an unfold 3D, and you'll get that. And that's done. Let's make sure we get our text density right. Just set that. Let's move this off to the side for now. Let's do this. Again, it's just a cylinder, so I'm just going to isolate this so we remember we have an inside as well. So let's come up to UVs and let's do a planar map. Okay, and now I know that I can come in here. Just gonna go into my unsmooth mode, and just turn this off so we can see things better. Just gonna double click on this border here, and on the border to separate the inside, right? And then we'll cut. So now we have the front here, and then we have this outside and the inside. Okay, so I'm gonna grab this and just unfold this right away. Unfold 3D. Cool. Done. Now I'm gonna shift to faces and select these faces, and I'm going to do a projection map top down so I can get these faces looking flat. Planar, y-axis, and we'll get this, right? and we still have both shells, right? We have this shell and we have this shell. So all I want to do now is find what I would consider the least visible seam that I can place. And I'm thinking at the bottom here. So here, here, cut, and then on the inside, here, 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 cut. And now I can grab both of these. We'll go to unfold, so hold shift, right click, unfold, unfold options, and go to legacy, and let's just stretch these out horizontally. Alright, now all we have to do is grab all of our UVs and just set the text density, and we're done. Right? I know at this point it's probably repetitive and you don't need these videos, but just to make sure, I'm kind of like beating this into your brain. And always make sure to check your UVs, right? Make sure everything looks good. So I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to keep them close together because they kind of just go together. Okay. And the last object we have here is the door. So let's see. Oh, we can talk about a different projection map. So I like using this now. This is kind of new-ish. I want to have a flat projection of this object, a planar projection, right, of this object, so I can see this front nice and clean. However, based on the planar map options, we can only do that on the absolute Y, the absolute Z, or the absolute X, right? So we have this other option called camera based, and it's pretty much exactly what it says it is. We can lock our camera, or rather just position our camera to view this right in front. We'll go to UVs, camera based, and you'll get that, which is perfect. It's what we need. So I'm going to isolate this object right there. I'm going to unsmooth this so I can see things a little bit easier. And again, this is just a box, right? So all we really need to do for a box is we have to be able to pull out these flaps, right? This, and that, right? So just going to come to these corners, select all of those corners, edges, right? So you can see a little bit better. Just going to turn off the texture. So we have that, and that one. And we come in here, hold shift, right click, cut, we'll create those seams. Grab all of your UVs, and let's just unfold this. So let's go to unfold, unfold options, and let's see what unfold 3D does. And that's pretty much it. So let's see what this looks like. Nice and neat and clean. Okay. Awesome. So that was a pretty quick video. Great. I guess we'll make a video going over how to arrange all of your UVs now. So we select everything. We have all of these pieces floating around. Oh, I forgot to adjust the texel density for this door. So let me grab this, grab the door alone, and grab these UVs, texel density, set, there we are. Alright, so I have all these pieces and I want to be able to organize them in this space in a, let's say, logical way. Alright, so we'll make a video on that. Awesome. So I'm going to end the video there, and I'll catch you all on the next video. Take care. Hello class. So we're going to continue with our UVs here. Just going to wrap this up for the UV side of things. And so let's select everything. So we have this happening right now. And right now we know that everything is all of our shells have the correct textile density in relation to one another, right? So we want to make sure if we need to make adjustments to these sizes anymore, we just do it uniformly. So we would select everything and scale it down uniformly. That means everything maintains its textile density consistent to one another, right? So there's a few different ways that we would lay out our UVs. Like right now, this is insane. It doesn't make any sense, right? Why would we have things floating around like this? And we always want to make sure that our UVs live in one of those grid spaces, whether it be 0 to 1 in both the X and Y axis. They refer to it the U or the V axis here because you're in your UV space. But we want to make sure we stay in the positive side. So it could be in this grid space, this grid space, this grid space, this grid space, all the way up to like infinity almost, because you can extend this even more. However, if you were to do something like an asset for a video game and you were creating UVs for them, depending on how important the asset is, like if it's a hero asset, then obviously you have access to plenty of these grids on your UV space, which we consider them, or we call them UDIMs, UDIM. Not entirely sure what the acronym stands for. I'm sure I've heard it at some point, but it's lost on me at the moment. I'll remember it at some point, and I'll let you all know. So, in a video game setting, if you have an asset that doesn't require, or they don't want to allocate that much UV space, because it's going to be something that's going to be not in front of the camera, it's going to be further in the back, or if they're just trying to save, if it's like a very low budget game, and it's like an indie game, and you don't have all of the hard drive to push this game too far, then you have to be very methodical with how you lay out your UVs in order to be able to texture many things with just one single file, right? Because if you were to create a UDIM for every single piece on this object, you would need a bunch of separate files, and they could be upwards of 2K or 4K files. If you're doing film, you probably get into 16K files, something like that. They get pretty intense. So obviously those file sizes are huge. So it'll be a much heavier process to render out. And if you're working in video games, then you have real-time engines, which they have to render these things out on the spot over and over and over again while the game is being played. So that obviously bogs things down a little bit, and it weighs down the performance. So they have to be very methodical when it comes to these things in video games. And there's a lot of tricks, and we break a lot of rules. Not me specifically, haven't really done video games in a long time. Especially here in New York, you're mainly doing film, TV, commercial stuff, which we have more leeway when it comes to UV mapping. So we can make a single, we can use a single UV grid space or a single UDIM for every single piece here. But of course, that's still inefficient, right? We don't want to be wasteful for no reason just because we can. So what I like to do is, for the biggest object, we can go ahead and scale this up a little bit, make sure it fits in there. And you don't want to cross these lines, okay? And now we have all of this space to fit something else in there, right? If we can. If we can't, we can't. So all of these small things you can probably throw in there. I want to see if maybe we can throw these things in there. No, probably not. 1, 2, probably sneak in a third. No. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to throw this in here because this is the door. It's going to belong with this anyways. These are our bolts. Might as well have them in there. They're going to fit, so it's fine. Just grab all of them, bring them over. You can select the shells if you like as well, so you can just right click, go to shells. Okay. This is our window here. Hopefully I can fit this in here. I think I can. I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to move it over a little bit more. Just make sure you don't cross over, right, to the outside of this Udem tile. Move this over. I might flip these, so I'm going to bring that to the top and bring these down since there's a little bit more space up top. And we could have something like this. And that'll be your first Udem tile, right? And then we can just go selecting the rest of these things and making them fit. So we have our fins here. I'm gonna grab this, maybe drop it down here. And you just try to be as space efficient as possible. All right. We can grab this and see if we can move this. Actually, I might grab these since they're a little smaller. Move them over. Pretty sure I can fit this. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to bring this down a bit. Okay. Or if you want to be more space efficient, I might bring this over here. Drop this over here. And drop this down here. Or down here. See if it's possible. So it's like playing a little game of Tetris here. As long as it's clear what these objects are, there's no overlapping, you should be fine. And again, I like to just keep things neat, so things that kind of live together, I kind of group them together, right? If you can also set them up in the way they exist in 3D space, so you might, like these pieces down here, for the propulsion system. If you're able to, you can probably stack them. Let's see if we can do that if I move this over a little bit more. Move this over a little bit more. And this is the top. So let's see if we can fit all this stacked. This is the middle. Great. And this one is going to be tough, but it fits, right? And then you have them kind of in order, so visually it just makes sense. That's not necessary. At some point, you just have to make things work. And then we have these rings, which looks like they're not going to fit anywhere in here. So we move over to another tile. We'll have that there. And again, since this is on the bottom, I might just grab this and pull it down underneath. Grab this and pull this up. Okay? This is how we would do it for like TV, film, commercial work. Unless you're told otherwise, right? It also just depends on what the studio wants you to do. So just keep that in mind. And this will work just fine. If this was like we discussed, a video game company, they would probably, for something like this, they would probably ask you to fit all of this in this single Udem tile. So you would have to shrink everything, select everything, and then figure out what's the appropriate size where you'll be able to fit all of this in here, which this probably works. And this might be even too small. Actually, it's pretty close to what it should be. And this is when you have to be a little bit more creative with how you space things out, right? Because now you have to really be a lot more conscious of where things are fitting. Looks like this is gonna fit down here just fine. This I can probably stagger them a little bit, and you'll be able to fit them. Move this down a bit. And I think, I can still play around with this. Like if I really wanted this to be, let's say, more space efficient or take up more space, since there's still some negative space here and there, I could probably scale things up a little bit more and then maneuver them a little bit better. Or I can pick and choose what I want to be, and this is when we start breaking rules, right? Like this is the biggest object there, so sometimes we will just prioritize that. We will scale this up bigger than everything else, and we would adjust everything around this shape because this is going to have the most attention, right? The most visual attention. But something like this will be fine too. And this is probably what I'll keep it at, just because this is not that complicated of an object. So I don't think it requires a ton of UDIM tiles in any scenario. But that's just an example, right, of how these different types of UV layouts or methods for UV laying your shells will apply depending on the situation, the job, or the studio. All right, awesome. So yeah, I'm gonna cut the video there, and I think in the next video we'll just wrap things up. I guess we'll clean this up here because this looks a little bit messy. We'll talk about how to just get everything nice and neat here and have everything into one compact group for your final asset. All right, awesome. So good luck. If you have any questions, please reach out, and yeah, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care. All right, class, so getting back to this, now that we have all of our UVs done, nice and neat, we want to clean this up before we move forward and organize our outliner and group things properly and clear our history. There's a bunch of steps we have to take before this model is ready to be passed off for the next step. Okay, so let's do the easy stuff first. Let's start naming these things. Is that the easy stuff? Well, it's the most annoying thing, I guess. So the general naming convention, it differs between studios, so take this with a grain of salt, but there are going to be naming conventions. They do like to have these things organized, especially if you're working at a big studio. They're very strict about naming conventions because everybody follows. There's too many people in a studio like that. Everybody follows the same steps in terms of naming their objects, in terms of naming files, so everybody's on the same page and is aware what these names mean. Okay, so for something like this, I'm going to use the most common naming convention I've seen, and it's pretty simple. So usually it's the material underscore the entire object or the entire model, what that object is, and then the specific object that you have selected. So for example, this, I'm just going to name this metal underscore, this will be the rocket body, so rocket body. Okay, so it's the material, which is some sort of metal. My guess, anyways. That's how I'm thinking about this, as what this object would really be. If you're working at a studio, they might want you to be more specific. Like if you are doing a metal, they'll ask you specifically for what type of metal. That way the texture artist would know, oh, I have to make this aluminum, or I have to make this titanium, or whatever, copper. All right, but we're trying to keep this simple for now, okay? So let's just say metal. And most of these things are going to be metal, I think, actually. Yeah, I'm probably going to make all of this metal. and maybe, well, this will be glass. All right, so let's just go through it. So it's a material, the object we're modeling, which is a rocket, and then the part that we have selected. So this, I'm just gonna copy this, paste, and this will be metal, rocket, this will be door. Okay, and we're gonna go through all of this. So, not even sure what this, I guess I'm just gonna call it like a band. So, paste, rocket, say band. And this is gonna be 001 because we have 2 of these. So I'm just gonna grab this, copy, select this, and paste. And you can just paste that and it'll update the number at the end. Okay. This is gonna be window, so it's gonna metal, rocket, and this will be window, say frame. Whoops. Window frame. That's how you spell window. All right, and let's go to this actual window. Sure. I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna copy this and paste. And in case you're wondering, I'm just using Control-C and Control-V, copy and paste. Nothing special. This will be window glass. And I'm just gonna call these fins. So rocket fins. Oh, I'm gonna need a number here. So underscore 001, and let's go ahead and copy this. This will be 002. And 004. Okay, great. So let's move down here. This is our propulsion system. So let's go ahead and name this. Going to be metal rockets. It's going to say propulsion. And I don't really mind exactly what the name is. You don't have to copy the exact name of these objects. As long as it makes sense for the anatomy of whatever you're modeling, that's fine. It's going to be 001. Let's go ahead and copy, paste, and paste. Great. So what's left? I think only the bolts are left. Okay. So you have this. I'm just going to call it a bolt. It's going to be a bunch of these. Rocket, bolt, underscore 001. Okay. Go ahead and copy and paste this a bunch of times. Paste, cool, paste, 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 paste. Paste, paste. Okay, so those are all the top ones. And I'm just gonna click on this original bolt. I'm gonna middle mouse click and drag down to here to just to reposition this. Be careful not to hover over the text. If you do that, it'll group things, so it'll drop this under that door. You don't want to do that, okay? And let's continue. These are all bolts, I think, as well. So these are bolts. Oh, this is a bolt too. Let's go ahead and copy and paste. I'm going to drag this down just to keep this organized. Okay. That's a bolt, so copy and paste, or rather just paste, 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 all the way around. And that should be fine. Okay, so now that we have all of these things named, let's group things properly. So the easiest things are going to be the bolts. So let's grab all the bolts. I'm just going to click on this one, hold shift, and click on this. We'll select all of that, and just press Ctrl G to group. And these will be our bolts. Okay. Let's do the fins, I guess. They're right here. All 4 of these. Again, just click, hold shift, click all of them, Control G. These will be our fins. Let's grab all of this stuff here. Our propulsion system, let's go ahead and group them, Control G. And I'll probably write this out, propulsion system. You can get both of these bands together. Just go ahead and group, Control G. And should I say bands. And now the window and the window frame and the window glass, Control G. And this will be our window group. And now we can grab this rocket body and the door. We'll group them. This will be body. And the last thing we want to do is grab all of these. So I'm just going to select this group, hold shift and click on this. We'll select all of them. And again, Control G. So we'll have our master group. And this will be our rocket. Okay. And you want to make sure that you also have this going on. So this is why we placed this on the floor here. If by any chance you're hovering a little bit, you might see something like this where your pivot for the main group is down here. By default, that's what happens. Your any new group, the pivot will always be in the center of the absolute zero of the grid. So if this happens, you just have to adjust this, right? So we can just pull this down, make sure you get this pretty close to the ground, which looks pretty good there. Okay, something like that. And now we can just move our pivot back to place, right? So press D so we can move our pivot. We can hold X and just pull this up so it snaps to the center of the grid. Okay, and this is important because at some point, if you're modeling, this isn't going to be the end spot for your model, right? This is going to be brought into another scene, a bigger scene where the animation's happening, or maybe it's brought into a game, so some real-time engine. And you want to make sure that your model is very organized, packed together, so nobody's looking for pieces and they understand where everything is placed. And you want to make sure that this pivot is down here on the ground, because whenever you import this to another software or to another scene, this will represent the ground, absolute zero. So all they have to do is move their model wherever they need it to be, and they can scale it up. And it'll scale from the ground up. As opposed to, let's say if I move my pivot here, and that's where my pivot is, if I start to scale this, you'll have to do this, and then you have to eyeball the ground again. So it just creates another step that becomes kind of annoying. All right, so do that, and we're almost done. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to select all of this, and we want to make sure that we don't have any information here. So there might not be, depends on how much you moved your objects. There might not be that much to move around. But if you have any information here, unless I did it while I was modeling at some point. In any case, if you ever have any information here, whether it be translation or rotation or your scale isn't one, we want to make sure that we get all of that zeroed out, right? So much like we did with our solar system, right? So again, we're going to select all of our objects here. We're going to go to modify and freeze transforms. So you see everything zeroes out there and your scale is at 1. which is how it should be. And you also always want to make sure that you delete history. So delete by type and delete history. Okay, so when you look at this, this should all be clear. And yeah, that's it, at least for this. Okay, so in the next video, we'll talk about the next steps we're going to take for this project. So good luck, and yeah, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.